I am going to temporarily turn on our auto captions because I am not sure where our live captioner is. And I apologize to everyone that we do not have live captions right now. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But right now I am admitting everybody. Feel free if you want to hop in the chat and introduce yourself. Also, feel free if you feel more comfortable unmuting and introducing yourself, or if you would like to, you can go ahead and you can also let us know. You can message me in the chat and I can spotlight you. We do have an ASL interpreter today. So if you want to sign your introduction, our interpreter can vocalize that for you. So we had quite the, I'm giving a few more people times to come in and then we'll get in because I know we're starting a little bit late. I had quite the surprise last night at 8 p.m. when I got an email from our normal live captioning company that the captioner they had assigned to us was ill and they didn't have a backup. So I scrambled around and I thought I found another company. I'm not certain where they are right at this moment. So they may come. Again, I sincerely apologize for auto captions. That is not our intent, but hopefully that works okay. I know we're going to have some interesting jargon words that might not go out so great in the auto captions. I'm also recording a little bit differently today in hopes that our interpreter will be recorded because we did not have our interpreter recorded last time. Emma, would you mind helping me out with the chat? Because if I'm recording, I don't know what would happen if I opened that window while I'm sharing my screen. Do you mind? Has anybody introduced themselves? Would you want to read out anything that's in the chat?
Sure. So Deborah said, "Hi, I'm Deborah from Southeast Michigan. I've been using and creating WordPress sites for clients since 2006.
Welcome, Deborah.
And then Ryan Bracey, good to see you back. He said, "Hey everyone, I'm Ryan, a Central New Jersey-based WordPress developer." Kathy says, "Thanks for this great topic. I'm learning about accessibility and WordPress and grateful for the information." We have Melanie. She says, "Hello, I am Melanie Adcock, Noonan, Georgia, USA." And then lastly, oh, we just got another one, but Meg Miller says, "Hi everyone, happy to be here. I'm Meg, a WordPress developer in Southern California. I've been developing with accessibility in mind since 2016. That's awesome." And then we have Gary says, "I live in a small town in Southeast Ireland." Awesome.
Wow, cool.
I haven't much experience with WordPress and looking to learn about accessibility in it. New to the meetup. Thanks. Well, we are glad to have you here, Gary.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm just going to check and make sure I didn't get a private one sent to me. I don't think so. So we'll go ahead because I know we're starting a little bit later than we normally do because we had a little bit of those technical difficulties and I was hoping our live captioner would join us. So I'm going to get started and then there'll be time later on if you want to ask questions or introduce yourself later on in the meetup. I always like to start with a few announcements. So our Facebook group, we have, if you are interested in connecting between meetups, and that's just facebook.com/groups/wordpress.accessibility. Emma, do you mind throwing that link up in the chat? It's a great place. We're sort of starting to build it up and there's more conversation. So if you're looking for either advice or you want to give advice, because we love that also, it's a great place to join and connect with people between meetups. Really exciting news. We are officially approved as an event that can provide continuing education credits for your accessibility certification. If you have a WAS certification or a CPAC, PACC certification through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. This meetup will count as that. I don't think it's listed if you go look on the website yet, but if you go to the form to submit and request your credits or get credit for your credits, we are on the form, and it's both for sharing your knowledge credits and just attending credits. So the plus side is if you're interested in speaking, you can use this to help maintain your certification. The next announcement I have is we recently launched a website accessibility tools survey. We're hoping to use this to create information and do a meetup presentation sometime in the spring of next year. So if you are willing to go to equalizedigital.com/survey, we can also throw that link in the chat and fill it out. Even if you don't do a lot with accessibility, that is fine. And if you're willing to share the survey out with your network, we're trying to get as broad of a view and understanding of what sort of tools people use and how frequently they think about accessibility. And there are answers on there that are, my organization has never thought about this before. So please share it broadly with your network. We don't necessarily only want accessibility professionals to fill it out. Lastly, of course, if you have any suggestions for the meetup or you need any additional accommodations to make the meetup work for you, please contact Emma or myself. We're just our first names at equalizedigital.com. And you can email us, or you can also message us through the meetup group directly, or through Facebook if you join our Facebook group. We are, if you want to know a little bit more about us, Equalize Digital, we're a certified B Corporation, a WordPress VIP agency, and we're a corporate member of the IAAP. Our main goal is to try and make the world more accessible for people, and so that the web will work for everyone regardless of their ability. We have a WordPress plugin called Accessibility Checker. There's a free version of it on WordPress.org. And the goal of that is to provide more clear testing results for the things that can be found automatically. Not everything can, which is why this meetup today is going to be super important, because you still have to do manual testing. But we hope to try and make it a little bit easier to identify problems as you're creating content or as your clients are creating content on their website, so that maybe more problems can be avoided that don't have to be fixed later on. That's a little bit about us. You can find us on Twitter at Equalize Digital, or you can visit us on our website, and we're happy to help and talk to anyone as we can. So today's sponsor, just a little note about him, Leon Stafford. He is a developer at Stratic, which is a headless WordPress hosting company, and he's the creator of WP2 Static. He also maintains the accessible minimalism theme for Hugo, which is a different content management system, and is in the process of porting that over to WordPress. Leon really thinks that accessibility is a really important goal of technology, and he really is excited about getting people to care about accessibility. And he wants to thank everyone who comes to the meetup, because he just thinks like coming and learning about it is a great step. So Leon has kindly paid for both our ASL interpreters and our live captions for today's event. Of course, our live captioner disappeared today, unfortunately, but he is a sponsor. If you are on Twitter, we always like to encourage people to tweet a thank you to our sponsor. So his Twitter handle is written here on the slide, and it is LJS dot, so DOTDEV, LJS.dev. That's his Twitter handle. I think hearing from attendees and knowing that his sponsorship mattered and made the meetup more accessible, and that you appreciated it is great, and it helps encourage them to continue sponsoring us. So real quick, 2 upcoming events to look forward to. The first one is building a custom plugin with an accessibility first approach. That'll be Phil Webster. He is a developer at Delicious Brains. He actually used to work for us, so we know him very well and his work, and it's going to be a great presentation. So that will be Monday, November 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, which is 7 p.m. Central for those of you that are closer to me. And then our next meetup will be how to create accessible captioned videos for WordPress sites and beyond. And that speaker will be Meryl Evans, who is a deaf individual, and she will be sharing how, from the perspective of someone who utilizes captions, how they can, how you can make your captions work very well for people. And that will be Thursday, December 2nd at 8 a.m. Pacific or 10 a.m. Central. So now I want to quickly introduce our speaker, who's the main event. We're very excited to have him. We originally had a different speaker who ended up having a schedule conflict, but I honestly am super excited that Glen was willing to step up, because I have had the occasion to read a lot of Glen's thoughts in conversations at in the chat room at the IAAP. I got a little bit distracted because our live captioner joined. So let me introduce Glen, and then before I hand it over to him, I will get her assigned to type so we no longer have auto captions. But Glen is an accessibility specialist with 15 years of experience working in the field of accessibility. He is a certified professional in web accessibility and a web accessibility specialist. And he is very active in accessibility forums. I actually gave a talk where I blanked on some of my shortcuts for VoiceOver with Mac, and he was in the room and he helped me out, which was super handy. And he has a great technical background with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from North Carolina State University. Glen, I think you live in Utah. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So I'm really excited to hand it over to him, but I want to real quick, before I do that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. He can get everything queued up. And while I'm doing that, Glen, I'm going to change out and assign our live captioner the ability to type.
Okay, and you want me to go ahead and share now then?
Yep. All right, give me just one moment and then I'll give you the go ahead so that we know we have some more accurate captions coming. Okay, could I get a test from my live captioner, please? Awesome. All right, thank you everyone for the patience on that. We should be good with live captions, and I think you can go ahead and do your presentation. I'm going to unspotlight myself and go on mute, but I will watch the chat. Do you have a preference on questions? Do you want to pause or ask them at the end?
I think asking questions in context is good. So yeah, just go ahead and stop me from speaking if we have a question. Yeah, definitely.
Sounds good. We'll take away. And thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks, Amber. And good morning. And I guess good afternoon, late afternoon for the individual in Ireland. And maybe there's some other in Europe over there. And so good morning here on the East Coast. I am in, or Western Coast. I am in Utah. I've only been in Utah for 4 years. I'm from North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. That's why I have NC State as my university there. So we had somebody asked me in the chat how much snow we get here, and we did have a snowfall like 2 weeks ago or so, about 12 inches, way more than we expected. But then it quickly melted, and it's nice and sunny out today. I can see some leaves falling off the tree, some maple trees in the back. So it's nice out. I do want to give another shout out to the upcoming presentations here on the WordPress meetups. Meryl Evans is awesome. Even if you're not working on any kind of captioning for videos, I would still encourage you to attend. She's just super fun to listen to. She's from Texas and just has a lot of great advice and a lot of things that I've never thought about as far as captioning goes, as far as making captions a better usable experience, more than just the text that appears when people speak, but to have the right grouping and pauses and new line characters and things like that. Just so much more than I really realized. So that's going to be a fantastic topic, and would encourage you to attend. And a little, maybe a disclaimer, I'm not a WordPress user, but I do use lots of assistive technology in my regular job for testing for accessibility. And so today's talk really is about how to use the NVDA screen reader, which is a free screen reader. For those who may have read on the Meetup notes that Amber added, that for those on a PC, if you can go ahead and install NVDA, it's free. And in fact, I should have a slide here as far as the website, nvaccess.org. So that's nvaccess.org is the main website. And you can go directly to the download page, so /download, or from the main website, there's a download link as well. So I'm going to mainly go over the different settings in NVDA today, and I'll be doing demos all throughout while talking about the different settings. And then the latter half of the presentation, we'll actually look at a couple different websites running with the screen reader and with a few other tools that I use that hopefully will be helpful to you. So if you do have this installed already, you could start it up and then maybe follow along with some of the settings I have here. And I'll try to, yes, I guess, Amber, if you're going to monitor the chat, if there's any questions, yeah, just feel free to stop me, or if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, that is fine too.
I'll watch the chat and let you know. Some people did say they have it installed and they're ready to follow along.
Good deal. Now there are, on the PC, there are actually several different options. The two most popular screen readers are NVDA, which we're talking about today, and that stands for non-visual desktop access, in case you were wondering what those 4 letters meant. And there's also JAWS, J-A-W-S, kind of like the shark movie, but it's job access with speech. Now JAWS requires a license. There actually is a demo mode. You can run it for 40 minutes and to play around with it to see if you like it. And for personal use, the license I think is only $99 per year. For corporate use, it's pretty extensive. And but some companies buy it so that all their employees can use it. So that works out well. So JAWS and NVDA, they're similar. They have, because JAWS is a licensed product, whereas NVDA is free, and depending on how much work is being done on it, JAWS has a ton of features. Although NVDA has significantly caught up, as well as not only with feature use, but also just in people using it. It used to be that NVDA was pretty low on the usage scale, and JAWS was the dominant factor. But now it's probably about even on the PC at least. And then there's things like ChromeVox and Windows Narrator, and there's a couple others that are pretty low on usage. So typically when I do accessibility testing, it's pretty much with either NVDA or JAWS or a combination of the two. Typically when there's an accessibility issue and there's a problem in the HTML code, then it's going to be a problem no matter which screen reader you're using. So it in some respects, it doesn't matter which screen reader you use. They all work a little bit differently, but for the most part, have a lot of commonalities.
There was a question, Glenn,
Okay.
Mark McGuire is asking whether there is any difference using NVDA on a Mac through Assistive Lab and NVDA on Windows. I think that would also apply if you're using Boot Camp or some other parallels.
Right. Yeah, it's been a while. I used to have both a PC and a Mac. I don't have a Mac at the moment, but when I had one, and when we tried to do, this was with JAWS, when we tried to do JAWS, there were some issues with it, but this was years ago, and I think those issues have been fixed. But with regards to NVDA, I'm not sure if there are any problems. I'm pretty sure I've heard of people using it that way and have not heard of any problems, but I can't speak personally since I hadn't used it that way.
There was one person, Peter Brockenhire, says he uses NVDA and JAWS through Parallels on Mac, and it seems to work fine.
Right, thanks, Peter.
Before you continue, Karen said, "Oh no, I downloaded NVDA and can't turn it off or remove it." You might want to.
That was going to be one of my first, one of my first things is how to turn off NVDA or how to close it. So if it's talking to you right now, you can press the insert key plus Q for quit, and that will close down NVDA. Now you may have, and this is jumping ahead, if you're on a laptop, you might not be able to see an insert key, or if it's not written in white on the keyboard, it could be a secondary key, it could be written in blue, which means you have to hit the function key and then insert. And then if you don't see that, then you might have to do a combination. Usually it's like function plus control plus another letter just to get the insert key. But hopefully, or you can go, if you're a mouse user and you have vision, you can go click on the NVDA logo that's in the bottom right corner, and it'll bring up the menu and you can click on exit. So hopefully one of those ways will help you turn it off, because it's probably talking to you while I'm talking to you, and that can be very confusing, which actually brings out a very important web content accessibility guideline failure. I believe it's 2.2.2 is timing and is pause, stop, hide. And I'm not, I'm kind of jumping into WCAG testing without really explaining it. But one of the requirements for accessibility is that if something plays automatically, so that there's audio playing, whether it's a video or like a podcast or something, there has to be a way to stop that. Because when you have audio playing and a screen reader running, you have multiple inputs coming to your ears, and it can be multiple people talking to you at the same time is very distracting. So being able to turn that off. Yeah, so Karen says, Karen, you have not been able to close it yet with the insert key and Q? Oh. Right, well, you can press, okay. Yeah, caps lock with Q if you've turned on caps lock. You can try the insert key plus the letter S for.
I think she doesn't have an insert key.
Okay, then you have to go to caps lock and just hold out. You can press the control key to get NVDA to stop reading what it's currently reading, but then you might have to keep hitting it. So that'll at least make it quiet for a minute until I get to the next screen or two, which will hopefully help.
Yeah, also possibly if you're on Windows, you could do what I'm not quite remembering now, but is it Control-Alt-Delete would open up your task manager and you could force kill something?
That's true. Control-Shift-Escape will bring up the actual task manager dialog. Yeah, Control-Alt-Delete will give you a menu and then you can choose
task manager.
But Control-Shift-Escape will bring up the task manager directly. And from there, if you're looking at the list of processes, you could right click on NVDA into a end process. That's pretty drastic. Hopefully maybe these next slide or two will help. So for those who have not started up NVDA or are not distracted by it talking, when you first bring it up, you'll have like a welcome screen, and the last checkbox on the screen says, show this dialog when NVDA starts. And it's checked by default. I always turn that off because I don't need the little intro screen to come up every time I start NVDA. There's some interesting info there, I suppose, and you could look at it. Once you've read through once, you probably don't need it again. But I did mention, if you're on a laptop and you don't see a physical insert key, whether written in white on the keyboard or written in blue, and blue means, again, you need to press the function key while you press the insert, that you might have to look up your particular model of laptop to see what the alternative function key is to press an insert key. But that can make you feel almost like a piano player, because it often takes 3 fingers just to press the insert key or the insert key equivalent. And then you have to press another key for whatever the NVDA shortcut is that you're trying to access. So in this case here, when NVDA first comes up, there's the first checkbox on the screen says use caps lock as an NVDA modifier key. And someone mentioned this in the chat. So if you check that checkbox, that means your caps lock key will essentially act as the insert key. So anytime I say like insert plus Q to quit NVDA, you would press caps lock plus Q. And when you're in this mode, the caps lock will not make all your typing uppercase. NVDA intercepts that key. So you actually can't, I'm not sure how you would turn on a caps lock if you have this caps lock on for NVDA, if you really wanted to type in all uppercase, other than holding down the shift key. So hopefully, Karen, if you had this welcome screen and you turn on the caps lock, then you should be able to press caps lock plus Q to quit NVDA. So this is the first screen that comes up. It's just a welcome. And again, you can check that first checkbox if you want to use the caps lock instead of the insert key. And then there's 3 checkboxes here. The last one controls whether this dialog appears or not. And then the middle checkbox, start NVDA after I sign in, right? So when you log into your computer, if you want NVDA to automatically start running, that would be for typically for people who want to use NVDA for their everyday work, and just accessing their computer. And probably not for a sighted tester. You may not want NVDA running all the time. And that's not checked by default. So you would have to turn it on if you wanted that. So that's the main welcome screen. Again, uncheck that last checkbox and then you won't see the welcome screen anymore. You can get back to it if you want to see it again through the menu, through the help menu. All right, so to get to the settings, a couple different ways you can get to the settings for NVDA. The one I use most often is insert plus N, which I think someone just posted on the chat. So insert plus N, N being mnemonically, I'm not sure how, I guess the N in menu. So N for Nancy, in case you can't tell which letter I'm saying. Insert plus N will bring up the NVDA menu. And then you'll see a list of preferences, tools, help. Underneath help is the welcome screen again. So if you've turned off that previous slide that showed the welcome screen, if you wanted to get back to it, you can get to it from the help submenu. But from the NVDA main menu, if you select preferences, which is the first element in the menu, and then settings, which is the first element in the submenu, that will bring up the NVDA settings dialog. Now, if you don't use this shortcut key, you can actually just click on, if you're a sighted mouse user, you can click on the NVDA logo that's down in the bottom right if you're on a PC. Well, unless you've moved your status area. By default, the notification area is in the bottom right corner of your PC. You can actually hit Windows plus B for boy, I guess. Windows B will move your focus down there. I'm very much a keyboard user, so I love keyboard shortcuts. But Windows plus B will move the focus to the bottom right corner, usually to the chevron, the up chevron character. And then you can use left and right arrows to move across the menu. And you can press space bar if you're on the chevron to open up the kind of the more type menu. So if you don't see the NVDA logo in the taskbar, you might have to select on the chevron, and it'll be in the list of other apps that are running. And if you can either navigate to the NVDA logo with a keyboard and press spacebar, or you click on it with a mouse, and you will get the same menu that you see when you press Insert plus N. All right, great. Glad we were able to turn that off. So two different ways really to get to the menu, and certainly it's not, you know, whatever your preference is for selecting it and bringing it up. So the actual settings dialog has about a dozen different categories on the left side, and we're going to talk about half of those. The other half we don't really need to change. And I do want to caveat my comments here. In general, when you're doing accessibility testing, you kind of want to use the screen reader out of the box with its default settings, right? Because you don't want to change things that might affect how you hear, how a page is being read when you're navigating through it. You kind of want to have a default clean vanilla installation when you're doing testing. However, some of the settings we're going to go through today, they do not affect your accessibility testing or your accessibility use. It's more of a, I guess, more of a user experience, personal preference. And these are just my personal preferences, right? So you can certainly ignore anything I talk about today, or maybe change a few other little things. But I did want to mention, for the most part, I try to just test as is. And I just changed a few little things that make it, I think, a little bit easier to use the NVDA screen reader. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about in the general category, there are several sets of checkboxes in here. And so the first two checkboxes, the first one is save configuration when exiting NVDA. And the second one is show exit options when exiting NVDA. In my screenshot shows the first checkbox checked and the second one unchecked, but I believe the default, and this is how mine is set up right now, I believe the default is the opposite. So for anybody who's installed it recently and brings this up, I think that first checkbox is unchecked and the second one is checked. So typically you probably want to save your configuration when you close NVDA. So you might change the speech rate, you might change some of the highlighting options and things like that. Typically you want those options to be saved, so you will want to check that checkbox. And then the second one, when you're closing NVDA, you get this confirmation dialog, you know, are you sure you want to close it? I'm always sure I want to close it. So I don't want to see my exit options when I'm closing NVDA. So I uncheck that selection. Now I think as part of the exit options, if you have it, if this is unchecked, meaning that you will see the exit options, I think one of the options in that exit options will be to save your configuration. So I think you do have a way to save it, even if that first checkbox is not selected. And then the second set of checkboxes I have highlighted, it's the fourth and the fifth checkbox on the setting. First one is start NVDA after I sign in. And that same option was in the welcome screen that we just saw on the previous slide. So if you want NVDA to start as soon as you log into your computer, go ahead and check that. I have that turned off. I think it might be turned off by default. And then the second one, the other checkbox, use NVDA during sign in. This is so if you've restarted your computer and it comes up from the boot screen and your login screen, NVDA can start automatically at that point so that you can hear, you know, the user ID field and the password field just to log into your computer. This often requires admin rights. So if you have a work laptop and it's kind of locked down by the IT group, you might not be able to turn off this option. I think it's checked by default. So you might not be able to turn it off unless you go through your IT department and have them, you know, join a call with you or whatever to be able to turn it off for you. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's only going to run while you're logging in. but other than that, it won't start automatically if that previous checkbox, the start NVDA after sign in, if that's not checked, then NVDA will stop talking after you log in. So again, changing these settings really does not affect how you test with a screen reader. These are just more user preferences and the user experience. So I'm going to move on to the next category. So this one was the general category. The next one, the speech category, there are probably two things you will want to change. The first is the synthesizer voice. And by default, this comes up with eSpeak, is the built-in synthesizer. And it's very robotic. It's what you would hear kind of as an example. It's really, if you ever listen to Stephen Hawking with the speech synthesizer that he had, it was a very kind of a robotic voice. And that's what's default with NVDA. I've changed mine to be the Windows 1 core voices, which comes built in, comes with Windows. So you can change that. And it's a more natural sounding voice. And once you choose that you can have male or female. You can actually choose other accents. So you could have a British accent or an Irish accent or an Indian accent, or I don't know if they have localized US accents. Like I could, I'm from North Carolina. If I wanted to have a Southern accent with my screen reader, I'm not sure that option is available. But that would be kind of fun to check that. And then the other option here is the rate, which is how fast NVDA speaks. And I think by default, it's kind of mid-range, not too fast, not too slow, kind of the Goldilocks setting there. But you can, once you get used to it, you may want to speed it up a little bit because you get used to listening to it. When I do demos, I bump it back down because some people may not be used to it. I don't have it running super fast. And I'll talk about, there's ways you can change the rate while you're actually running it as well. You don't have to go into the dialogue here. There are shortcut keys for pretty much everything. Yeah, I don't have much of an accent. So my parents were from New England. Father was from Boston. My mother's from Vermont. But we moved to North Carolina when I was really young. And so all my friends were Southern, and I kind of had these Southern accents and New England accents, I guess a little bit of, sine wave curve canceling out. So I ended up with a, I don't know, newscaster voice accent where you can't really tell unless I'm hanging around my Southern friends, and then it kind of goes back to Southern accent. So the speech core voices, let me just pop over. I'm going to jump over to the browser, and I'm going to start NVDA just to show you a couple things. So I just typed NVDA. Oops, I misspelled it. And I'm sharing the audio through the presentation.
Volume level 30. Yep. Meeting control. How to test for.
All right, I just hit the control key to make it be quiet. So I'm going to use Insert plus N.
NVDA menu. Preferences sub-menu P.
Preferences.
Settings. S. NVDA settings. General.
All right, press the control key to make it be quiet. And I know this is probably a little bit small. There's a interesting, on Windows, you can use the Windows magnifier, which is really cool. If you press the Windows logo key and the plus key, and this is totally side topic, I guess, from what we're really talking about. The Windows key and the plus sign will bring up the magnifier, which brings up this panning window, which you can change the size of it. Right now, mine's a little bit smallish, but I can kind of hover over the tree. All right. So someone asked earlier, so Gary, I think Gary, you're in Ireland, right? I think. How do you turn off the speech mode? That was Insert plus S, the letter S, like Sam, or shut up, I guess. Insert plus S will turn off speech mode. There's actually 3 different modes of speech mode. There's the speaking mode, there's off, and there's beeps, which is really weird. The beeps option, I don't know why that would be helpful, but when you're in beeps mode, when you're tabbing around through your interface, you'll hear a high-pitched beep as you navigate to each element, which I suppose is useful at some point. They created that feature for a reason. But if you press insert plus S, that will toggle between the 3 different values. And NVDA will tell you speech mode off, speech mode beeps, and maybe speech mode on, I guess. I can try that.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
Oh, talk. Okay.
Speech mode off.
There we go. So that's handy. You can turn it off. You know, the control key just stops. And I have a list of all these quick keyboard shortcuts on the last slide, which I sent the slides to Amber earlier. I don't know if she was able to send any of them out, but you'll have all these keys here. So going back to the speech setting, I was talking about I have my synthesizer set to 1 core voices, but by default it's eSpeak. So if I turn that on, so I need to turn my speech back on.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk. Voice. Combo box English America collapsed Alt plus V.
So you can kind of hear it's robotic, a little bit choppy. So if I pop over to the
how to test for accessibility. Banner landmark header. Search for keywords edit from autocomplete blank.
Right, it's just, I don't know. It's a little harder to follow. I don't really like that.
NVDA settings. Speech normal configuration.
But you can see how you can change the voice and hear American, Spanish, pretty much all languages.
Voice list Esperanto.
So for English, you can have different types of English accents. We can have a Caribbean English accent. That'd be fun testing, man. But if we change it back,
select synthesizer dialog. Synthesizer list Windows 1 core voices.
So if I change it back to Windows 1 core voices.
NVDA settings. Speech.
Now for me, that's so much more relaxing. It feels a little more natural.
Voice.
And again,
voice,
you can change it to
list.
NVDA settings. Speech. Normal configuration.
That's David. Yeah, he's got a nice, pleasant voice.
Voice.
NVDA settings.
All right. So that's the synthesizer, and that I would definitely recommend changing it from the default, but it really is up to you what voice you use. And I mentioned the rate. You can change the rate.
51, 52, 62, 80, 92. Rate boost checkbox not checked Alt plus T. Pitch, slider 50 Alt. Verena Leans has left the meeting alert.
That's not that bad. I think you can understand it. So
rate boost, rate.
It's interesting. You can only go up.
One.
There's 100%.
Voice, combo box Microsoft Zero collapsed Alt plus V.
It's a little bit fast, but it's not fast enough for people that use screen readers all the time. My coworker was visually impaired and had his speech rate cranked way up. And so there's this rate boost checkbox you could turn on, which all that really does is make the rate slider above it to have a smaller scale.
Rate boost checkbox not checked Alt plus T. Checked. Rate slider 100 Alt plus R.
See, now it's.
Voice, combo box Microsoft Zero collapsed Alt plus V.
And really, that is the speed that he would run it at.
Rate slider 100 Alt plus R. Rate boost checkbox checked Alt plus T. Not checked.
So we'll go
rate,
back to.
Slider 1, 9, 8, 7, 60. Rate boost checkbox not checked Alt plus T.
All right.
How to test
There's a
PowerPoint
question.
slideshow NVDA PowerPoint
Sorry,
slideshow.
There is a
All right.
question from Bet. She's asking, does the Spanish setting read out a translation of the English text on the page, or is it for reading out content on this page in Spanish?
Right. It is not going to translate. It's going to read what's on the page. So it's not going to translate automatically for you. And let me bring that back up.
NVDA settings. NVDA settings. General, normal configuration, dialog, categories, list,
Oops.
speech property. Select synthesizer dialog.
What was
NVDA. Voice, list.
I guess that was on the
Microsoft
eSpeak.
David.
The eSpeak one had the.
And select synthesizer
Spanish.
dialog. Synthesizer.
NVDA
Also,
settings.
it might be helpful when you're
How
doing
to test for
demo to slow down the rate so our captioner could try to caption the screen reader also.
Good point. Yeah, I did slow it down, but more for listening, not for captioning. Now what happens? NVDA just
how
closed
how
on
to
me.
test for NVDA
Let me get
categories.
back to the speech.
Select
Oops.
expand synthesizer list.
NVDA settings.
All right, so I did it again. That's weird.
How to test for access
Maybe
NVDA
sounds like maybe a bug in NVDA. It looks like it was crashing and stopping
categories.
when I was trying to change the voice to Spanish, but we can try that later. I don't want to get too distracted at the moment, but really what it would do is it would read the page or whatever you're testing in whatever language the page is written in. So it's, in this case here, it's English, but it would read it with kind of a Spanish accent in that case. Now, if you have a section on your page where it switches language, maybe you're on a university website and there's a visiting professor from another country and you have his name written or her name written in whatever language that they're from, then hopefully the web page has a, and not to get too technical, but there's a language attribute in HTML that you can specify for pieces of the text. And so it will cause the screen reader, if you have the language pack installed, it would automatically switch the voice so you would get the right accent and the right pronunciation. And it's actually pretty good. So it would switch to a Spanish voice and announce it, you know, with a Spanish accent when it goes to that a Spanish word or a French word or German word or whatever the case may be. But if I right now, if I were to change it to a different country, it would just read all my text in, let's say, French with a French accent, but it would still say how to test for accessibility with NVDA because that's the text on the page. Just be like somebody from France reading it.
Here's another question. Why do you think, this is from Dave, why do you think NVDA has a rate boost checkbox instead of just a wider slider for the rate?
Yeah, that's probably because they didn't have a rate checkbox before, and you know the rate slider right now is the same width as the pitch slider underneath it, and then there's also a volume slider which is the same width, but it's moved off to the right a little bit just because the word volume is longer than the word pitch. I think it's just from an aesthetics point of view, they probably just had them all about the same length. That's just a guess. Yeah, having a longer slider probably would be good. There's a GitHub page for NVDA if you want to ask questions or look it up or report bugs for NVDA.
How to test for access.
Let me turn that back off. All right, so the voices is pretty cool. And you can choose one that feels good, you know, sounds natural to you. But let me move on to the next setting. Yeah, we already went through, so this dialog shows the select synthesizer, which we kind of went through quickly. The next one is the vision. Well, the next category is Braille, but I'm skipping over that. So the fourth category is vision. And there's an option here that I occasionally turn on underneath the visual highlight. And I have highlight navigator object. And this will turn on NVDA's, well, the highlighter, it basically draws a box around the current element that it is reading. And this sometimes gets in the way of my regular focus indicator when I'm navigating through a page. So I don't turn this on very often. It comes in handy when I'm doing a demo so that you can see where on the screen reader is pointing to or where its focus is, what it's reading. And I can show you that again real quick. So right now I'm on the Meetup page and I have a custom style sheet associated with my browser that makes my keyboard focus have a thick purple outline so that it's very obvious when I'm doing testing to see if I can navigate to all the elements on the page. I can see exactly where my focus is. Now, one of the accessibility requirements is to make sure that there's a valid focus indicator. And obviously, if I have a custom one, that's going to override whatever the page is currently doing. And so I would have to turn off my custom one in order to test the real focus indicator for the page. But otherwise, unless I'm checking for that one specific criteria, I usually have my purple outline on to make it very easy to see where I am on the page. So if I bring up NVDA again and turn on that object highlighter.
NVDA settings, general.
Go down to vision, and if I
Vision property page.
Turn on object, highlight navigator object.
Highlight browse mode cursor screen curtain grouping.
Now as I'm tabbing through the dialog itself, there's a red box around where my focus is. Let me just select apply.
Categories, list. Vision 4 of 13.
Move the dialog out of the way a little bit.
How to test for accessibility with NVDA. Speech mode off.
Turn off speech mode because we don't necessarily need to hear it at the moment. So now I am on the Meetup page. We have Amber's picture is highlighted. Now instead of tabbing through the interface, I can just press the up or down arrow key. And this is kind of getting ahead of one of the slides I'm going to talk about. But as you're navigating through a page, you can, with a screen reader, you can get to every piece of text on the page. And I've seen this done before where a developer might not understand that concept. And so they put a tab index on all their headings and their lists because they think someone in tab index of 0 allows someone to use a keyboard and tab to that element. But that is not necessary because a screen reader will let you navigate to every piece of text on the page, essentially using the up and down arrow keys. There's other keys you can use as well, but to think of it simply, if you were looking at the HTML code behind the page, looking at the DOM, the document object model, and if you were to arrow up and down through the HTML, that's exactly the order that the screen reader goes when you're using the up and down arrow key. So in this case here, let me turn speech back on.
Speech mode beeps.
Oh, you get a little beeps.
Speech mode talk.
All right. So now I'm going to press the down arrow key.
Visited link hosted by.
So we got hosted by. Now there's a red border around that. Let me press down arrow.
Visited link Amber Hines. Visited link graphic word. Visited link WordPress accessibility meetup.
I'm trying to get to, oh, let me go back up because I wanted to get to the actual title of this page, which is how to test for accessibility. Let me arrow up quickly.
Visited link host graphic Amber Hines.
Let me up arrow once more.
Heading level 1 how to test for accessibility with NVDA. Rate 55. Rate 50.
Turn that down a little. I'm going to go up again to the date.
Thursday, November 4th, 2021.
Okay, so I'm just using the up and down arrow keys to navigate to all the pieces of text. And with the highlight turned on, you can see a red box around the date. So just giving you an indication of where the screen reader is looking at on the page. So it makes it a little bit easier. Typically, if you're doing testing, you might want to turn that on just to see how different elements are announced. But it's not something I have on all the time. I just turn it on occasionally. And again, mainly to when I'm showing a demo so that people can see where the screen reader focus is. Otherwise, you just have to listen to what the screen reader is saying and try to match it up with what you're hearing with what you might be able to see on the screen to see where the focus is.
There was a question, if you don't mind me jumping in, that I missed
absolutely.
earlier. Mark was wondering if the different voice options affect the NVDA screen reader output.
The speech viewer, which I think is what you're talking about, the output.
Yes, the speech reader output. Sorry.
Yeah, the speech viewer will just echo what is really, it's going to show what is being read from the HTML. So in this case here, it would show me Thursday, November 4th, 2021. And I will go ahead and bring up
speech viewer enabled.
Even though that's on one of my future
NVDA
slides. NVDA
speech viewer.
And actually, I'm going to bring up the magnifier as well. So I'm going to have all kinds of assistive technology running at the same time. So I'm going to have the magnifier hovering over the speech viewer, hopefully to make it a little easier to see. I don't know if is the magnifier coming? I'm not seeing it on my.
It was there, it like
Yeah,
hovers, but then it's flashing and going away.
That's weird. Let me close it and bring it up again. Yeah, it kind of. Now that's annoying. It kind of flashes, comes back and forth, but the speech viewer is up. And if I toggle over to the browser.
Meeting control. How to test for accessibility with NVDA. You're going to this event. Thursday, November 4th, 2021.
So I'm pressing the down arrow.
Heading level 1, how to test for accessibility with NVDA. Screen.
So the speech viewer, if I were in a different language, you know, maybe it was reading with a French accent, it's still, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to read the English words that are on the page because that's what it's written as. And the speech viewer will just show me the text that is being read. So in this case here for the header or the heading, how to test for accessibility, in the speech viewer, you actually see the word heading first, and then you hear or read level 1 because it's an H1, and then you see or you read the actual text. So really it is more than just what is displayed on the screen. There's like metadata behind the scenes that if you're using the proper HTML elements, that you will get all this metadata read by the screen reader, which is fantastic information. So in this case here, as a sighted user, if you see text that's larger and bolder, typically that's a heading. Now,
From Amber Hines, equalized.
As a
speech mode off.
Turn off speech mode because I have the chat open, and so the screen reader is going to read updates in the chat window. But
I was wondering if you want to turn the magnifier off because the flashing is a little.
It is, yeah. That I don't want to cause any. There we go. Sorry about that. Sometimes it works well when you have multiple assistive technologies running. Anyway, I was talking about the metadata. So when you're using, you know, as a sighted user, I can tell it's probably a heading. Now, as a sighted user, I don't know if it's an H1 or an H2 or an H3, which as a casual user probably doesn't matter, right? You don't really care what level heading it is. But when you're using the proper elements, the screen reader will tell you that additional information, such as it's a heading and it's a level 1 heading. That's kind of going way off topic from what Mark, I think, was asking about if you change a different language for the voice, will that affect the speech viewer window? And generally, the answer is no. It's going to show me exactly what it was reading. All right. All of that was just to show the highlight navigator object. And again, turning this on or off does not affect the actual accessibility testing of the page. It's just more of a user feature that helps you navigate through the page when you're using the screen reader. So the next category is keyboard. And again, this is a personal preference for me. There are 2 options in here about speak typed characters and speak typed words. And I believe the default setting is for characters to be turned on and for words to be turned off. And I actually changed that, so it's the opposite. I have characters turned off and I have words turned on. And just a real simple example here. So if I have a Word document up, I only brought up Word just to make it easier to type something. And let me switch over.
Meeting document 1 Word, Microsoft.
Let me bring up the
NVDA
settings.
Categories, list, keyboard property page.
And I'm turning characters on and I'm turning words off, which I think is the default setting. So let me go back over to my Word
document one.
So if I start typing,
HELLO HERE space WORLD.
right? You hear the characters as I type. I mean, it's what the option says it's going to do. You speak typed characters, and that's all it read. Now, if I go back to the settings,
NVDA settings, keyboard, normal configuration.
If I turn off characters and turn on words, you can have them both on if you want, but I generally have just the words turned on. Let me apply that.
Categories, document 1.
Go back to Word. Now let me type the same phrase, hello there world. So now as I'm typing letters, it's not saying anything. But as soon as it detects I'm at a word boundary, so if I hit the space key,
Hello
it read the word.
there world.
So I typed a period at the end and it read the word world. So this is just speak typed words versus speak typed characters. Like I said, you could have them both on so you hear the characters, and then when you hit the space bar, it'll read out the word, for spell checking and things like that. So that can be
Microsoft
handy.
Word dialog want NVDA setting.
So I have mine. Yep, I have the right ones turned on. Sometimes hearing characters can be helpful if you're typing code, right? So if you needed to type a div element, a div element, you might want to hear the letters div as you're spelling. So when you're coding, certainly hearing characters can be helpful, because if you just have words turned on, what's it going to say if you type img for an image tag? I don't know that it'll say image. It might say the letters img, or it might try to pronounce it as a word. So in that case, having characters turned on could be helpful.
Speech mode off.
I'm going to turn off my navigator object for the moment, and characters and words. Okay, any questions on that? I'm going to jump to the next one. Next one is really, it's a little, I don't know if it's odd, but under the mouse, let me turn off my screen reader. When the screen reader is running and you're doing a PowerPoint slideshow, I usually use the left and right arrow keys to go to the next slide. So here's my next slide. I hit the right arrow key. But if the screen reader is running and I press the left or right arrow key, it's going to try to read the next character underneath the focus. And so I would have to, a couple different things. I could have the key press get passed through and ignore the screen reader and go directly to the PowerPoint slide, but generally I turn it off when I go back and forth between the two. So the next category under keyboard is mouse, and I'm pretty sure the second checkbox is selected by default, and it's called enable mouse tracking, which is, I don't know, totally useless from a testing perspective, and it's very noisy. So when mouse tracking is on, that means when I move my mouse around the page, whatever is underneath my mouse will be read by the screen reader. Now, this might be a helpful option if maybe I have lower vision and I'm using a screen reader to kind of augment my experience. And if I see something on the screen, I'm not quite sure what it is, and I have a very large mouse pointer, so I go hover over that text because I want to hear it being announced. Well, absolutely, I can understand a setting to help with that. But by default, for accessibility testing and really for other use, you probably do not want mouse tracking turned on. So you would want to turn off that checkbox. That can also be done on the fly with insert plus M for mouse. So if you wanted to toggle the mouse tracking, you can do insert M or caps lock M if you're on a laptop and have caps lock. So this is, if all the options I talk about today, this is probably one of the most annoying and probably one of the first things you want to do, maybe one of the most important things to change, maybe in addition to the voice, but you can still navigate even with a robotic voice. Real quick, so Amber, I think we only have like 15 minutes left, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably go a little bit over. I'm assuming we may need to switch to auto captions. I'm not certain what'll happen with our interpreters.
So. All right. we're almost done with some of these settings here.
Okay. So maybe I'll hold questions until the end so you can move quickly through.
Yeah, I'll let you. I mean, if it sounds like an urgent question, you can interrupt me. Let's see. Somebody was talking about the rotor. If they're talking about rotors, I assume they're doing VoiceOver in the chat. All right, so mouse, turning off mouse checking. Browse mode is several categories down underneath mouse. This is, again, just a personal preference for me. When you're using the up and down arrow keys to navigate through a page, NVDA, if you have a long paragraph that is going to be read, NVDA will stop after a certain number of characters. And it kind of makes listening to it a little bit disjointed. Now you can do a say all, like insert down arrow to read the entire page and things like that. But so I've just bumped up the number of characters that can be read in one line. I think by default it's 100, and it only lets it go up to 250. So I have that maxed out. I generally don't listen to long paragraphs of text when doing accessibility testing, but I've bumped that number up. And another option in the browse mode, there's the third checkbox is automatic say all on page load. And this might be handy when you're actually using a website and using a screen reader to hear the page read, but more often than not, you don't need the entire page read. You might want to go to a site, maybe it's a news site, and you want to go ahead and let it read the page load to hear what the different articles are and different stories that are written about on there. But from a testing perspective, you generally do not need to hear the entire page read from a testing perspective. From a usability perspective, that could be handy. So I've turned this option off, the automatic say all. Again, it doesn't really affect testing. It's just a setting for personal preference. One or two more, I think, options here. So the next one down is document formatting. And there's a lot of different options here, some really neat options. You could turn on an option that tells NVDA that you want to hear, let's say, anytime the font size changes. So whatever the normal font size is for a page, if someone changed the font for some important text to be bigger, and maybe they didn't use a real heading element, an H1 or H2, you could still have NVDA announce when the font size changes or the font family, or if there's bold or italic or things like that. You can have that information announced, which is really cool. I would not enable those options from a testing perspective, because then it might mask some problems. Like if maybe there's bold being used to indicate some meaning. Well, if you have that option turned on and so the screen reader says bold text, well, now well, there's something important about this text. Whereas if they didn't really use the proper setting in HTML to announce what that important information is, that could potentially mask the problem. But that's what all these document formatting options are. Now, if you scroll down these options down to the table section, table information, cell coordinates is normally checked, and I turn that off just for my own purposes. If you're navigating through a table, it's 20 rows and 20 columns, and you're navigating through the table itself, cell by cell, it's going to announce not only the row header and the column header for the table, but it's also going to tell you row 3, column 10, and then maybe row 4, column 10, row 5, column 10, if I'm navigating down a column. That can be pretty handy. I don't find that I need to hear that, the cell coordinates, so I turn that off. Again, it doesn't really affect testing, more just the user experience. And got a table here. I can show something. And let me turn on
NVDA settings, general, normal configuration, dialog, general, quick reference guide.
All right, be quiet for a second. So I have my coordinates turned off for table reading, and I just turned on the object navigator highlighting so we can see it. I'm going to press the letter T for table to get down to a table on this page.
Basic commands table with 23 row action.
And I'm going to use, now that I'm in the table, I can use Control Alt plus the arrow keys to navigate across a row or down a column. You know, think of it as if you're in a spreadsheet and you use the normal arrow keys to navigate around the different cells. If I press Control plus Alt and those arrow keys, then it's the same type of thing. So if I do Control Alt down,
turn quick NAV, move focus to the next item.
I've gone down 3 rows. Now if I go Control Alt right,
gesture one finger, keyboard with quick NAV on right.
Right, it's not important to really hear what's being announced. I'm just saying you can kind of navigate through it, but it's going to announce the column header, depending on which direction. If I'm navigating horizontally, it's going to announce the column header before the table cell. Or if I'm moving down a column, it'll announce the row header on the left side before it reads the table cell. But that's all I'm hearing. Now, if I were to turn on
NVDA settings, vision,
document formatting and scroll down to table,
document,
turn on cell coordinates,
categories, quick reference guide, move focus to the previous item, row 5 left arrow.
So now if I go down,
activate the item that has focus, row 6 up arrow plus down arrow.
A lot of stuff was read there and a little bit fast, but it did say row 6 in the middle of that. And then if I go to the right,
keyboard with quick NAV off column 4 VO plus spacebar.
Right, it said column 4. So it's announcing the cell coordinates in that case. I think without Control Alt, if I just do down arrow, it's going through the DOM. So it's actually going to just navigate across my table. When it gets to the end one, it'll go to the first one of the next line.
Braille column 5 3 plus 6 plus Eve has left the meeting alert. Braille column 5 3 plus 6 plus spacebar or joystick in.
So it said column 6. Right. Again,
NVDA
you may
settings,
or may not want
document formatting, normal configuration.
All right, close that down real quick. Okay, good. That was the last settings. And this was mentioned already, but another really cool tool in NVDA is the speech viewer. And you can get to that through the menu. So insert plus N brings up the NVDA menu. But instead of preferences, the first element in that submenu, if you go down to tools, the second element, and go to the submenu, the second item in the submenu is speech viewer. Now this is a pretty handy feature so that not only can you listen to what the screen reader is saying, but you can also see, for sighted users, you can see exactly what is being read. And as I mentioned earlier, there may be some extra metadata that is announced. If I navigate into a list, it'll say, here's a list with 10 items, and then it'll read the actual text. So it has some extra information there, which is really, really helpful. Now the speech viewer, I use on and off, but there is an option when you bring up the speech viewer. There's a checkbox at the bottom of the speech viewer dialog that says show speech viewer on startup. And so you can turn that on. That way, anytime you start up NVDA, the speech viewer dialog will also come up automatically at the same time. Now, as I mentioned, I don't use it all the time, so I really don't want this checkbox checked. So I often go through the menu here under tools and then speech viewer and turn it on. But I do it often enough where I like to have a shortcut key to bring up the speech viewer. And this is just a really cool feature of NVDA. If you go back up to preferences under the main menu, and I think this might be on my next screen here. If you go under preferences, the first element under the submenu is settings, which we spent most of our time on. But the last option in that submenu is called input gestures. I'm not quite sure why they call it input gestures. It's really keyboard shortcuts is what it does. So if you that brings up a dialog which has a bunch of different categories of input gestures. If you scroll down the list of categories, near the bottom is something called tools, and it's a tree view. So if you expand tools, the last sub element under tools is toggle the NVDA speech viewer, right? And so if that is selected, and then you go down and navigate to the add button, you can add a keyboard shortcut that will allow you to bring up the speech viewer pretty quickly. So when you click on add, it'll say enter input gesture, which really is just a keyboard shortcut. So whatever key I want to use, in my case, I use Control Shift V, V for viewer, and I just use, instead of Control V, I could use Control V, I suppose, to bring up speech viewer, but I use Control Shift V. You just hit whatever key combination that you want to use, and it'll echo that key combination. So in my case, I press Control Shift V, and it's asking me, I'm not sure why it asks what kind of keyboard I want to associate this shortcut with. It can either be just a desktop keyboard or all keyboards. I haven't played around what the difference would be. So I always choose all keyboards or all layouts when I assign a shortcut key. So now if I want to bring up the speech viewer, I can just hit Control Shift V, if I remember what that shortcut key is. So I'm kind of in the middle ground where I don't want that checkbox in the speech viewer that says always show it, when it starts it up. I don't want it all the time, but I use it often enough where I don't want to have to navigate through the menu to preferences and settings, or preferences and then tools, and then show speech viewer. I use it more often enough than to want to navigate through that. So I create a shortcut key in this case here. All right. That was all the settings. That took a little bit longer, but that was great. A lot of great questions here. These are probably the most common keys you will use with NVDA. And we used a bunch of these already. So the common keys I have on the left side, and then I actually have browser keys over on the right side, which are specific if you're navigating a web page. But the common keys on the left side, insert plus Q for quitting NVDA. And again, we talked about this. You can go down to the NVDA logo in the taskbar, bring up the menu and click on exit. But insert plus Q is a quick way to get it to close. The control key is kind of a temporary shut up key. And your parents may have told you not to say shut up. It's not very polite, but that's what it does. Sometimes it's just talking so much, reading a long paragraph. Just press the control key and that'll make it be quiet. And it's temporary because the next time you navigate to the next item, it'll start talking again. Whereas the last keyboard option here in the common keys was insert plus S. That's more of a permanent, or maybe it's a semi-permanent setting. It toggles the setting between speech mode and speech beeps and the talk mode. So you can toggle between the three settings. So NVDA is still running when you press insert plus S. You can have the speech viewer up and it'll keep, updating as you're navigating through the page. It just won't be announcing anything. So it's more of a little bit more permanent. But this setting, when you do insert plus S, change the speech mode, it is not saved. So if I close NVDA, bring NVDA back up, it'll start talking to me again, even if I had it on the beeps mode or the off mode. So even though I have save settings on exit, it does not save the speech mode, but it comes in handy. We did up and down arrow keys already. That's kind of, you're walking the HTML code, the DOM, so that you can read every piece of information on the page. We talked about insert N to bring up the menu. The only one we didn't talk about on common keys was insert plus F7. And for both JAWS and NVDA, it brings up a list of elements. For JAWS, it's really just a list of links. For NVDA, you can look at a list of different types of elements on a page, and it's pretty handy. So if I want to jump over to, let's say the WordPress site, and I bring up NVDA again.
Meeting, how to test speech viewer in a.
Okay, I hit Control Shift V to bring up the speech viewer just so you can see it. And then I'll press insert plus F7.
Elements list dialog, tree view, level 0 notifications. How to test for access NVDA speech viewer, show speech view. Meeting control, how elements
All right. Oh, apparently I still have my red highlight turned on. So insert plus F7. I don't know whether let me close the speech viewer down for a second. Oh, there's two dialogues open in NVDA. I can't close the speech viewer. I was going to bring up the magnifier again, but I didn't want it to be flashing and such. Let's see. Yeah, it's doing the same thing. So if there's a way for you to magnify it yourself, actually, yeah, as you're watching this presentation and you're on Windows, you can press the Windows key and the plus key to bring up the magnifier yourself, and then you can hover it over this dialog and see it a little bit bigger. So this elements list dialog through insert plus F7, I can look at all the links on the page, and it's pretty handy to see all the links, and then I can check to see whether they're labeled properly, right? I just scrolled the list towards the bottom and I see, it looks like 4 different.
Meetup 69 of speech mode off.
I can see 4 different links that are labeled Meetup. It's like, well, I really don't know what the difference is between all of these. Now in context, if I look at the page, if I were to find these links on the page, there might be some other information around these links that make them make sense in context, which is WCAG 2.4.4. But generally, even with context, that technically passes WCAG. I generally try to make all of my links make sense just by the link text themselves. And even though that's TIAA guideline 2.4.9, it's helpful to have your link make sense in by itself. So this list of links is really handy just to look, get a quick look of seeing everything. Right, here's a see all link. Well, see all what? If we were to look at the page, I believe there's like attendees. I think, yeah, attendees 92, and it has a see all link next to it. Well, in context, you probably figure out that it's see all of the attendees instead of just the 8 that it shows on the page right now. Well, the link by itself, see all, doesn't really make sense. So it would be nice if it said see all attendees. And in fact, I think they do this for some of their links. This is the Meetup page. I think some of these see all links do have that context where it'll say see all attendees, but they didn't do it for all of them. In fact, I think, try this real quick. Yeah, so I just tabbed over to see all, and in the speech viewer, not sure if you can see it, it says see all. Oh, that's the one that's unlabeled. So maybe it's the photos one that has it. Yeah, this one says see all photos link. So that's a good link in that case. It was the attendees see all that was not good. So we are right on the half hour here. Screen reader down. But we can, for those who want to hang around, we could potentially, I can show some of these browser keys. This is really the last slide on this presentation. If we wanted to navigate through a page with the screen reader and try to listen and watch for accessibility issues, we could try to do that for a couple minutes. And I could also, if we wanted to practice any of these keys, the browser keys over on the right side of the page, they're mostly mnemonic. So for example, the letter B, just press B by itself when you're on a website and the screen reader is running. It will take you to the next button on the page. And then Shift plus B will go to the previous button. And so a lot of these letters, C for combo box, R for radio button, checkbox starts with a C, but since C is already used for combo box, they use the letter X for navigating to the next checkbox. And same thing with images, links. So it's really cool to be able to navigate to these different elements. And as I mentioned before, the up and down arrow keys let you navigate to every piece of text on the page. But if I wanted to jump just to the headings on the page, I could press the H key, the letter H for heading, and it would navigate to each heading in turn. If I want to navigate specifically to maybe all the H2 elements, the heading level 2s, I could just press the number 2 and it would go to each heading level 2, or Shift plus 2 to go backwards. And so you can kind of check the organization and structure of the page by navigating through the headings. You might see something on the page that looks like a list, a bulleted list, maybe it's not coded up properly as a list. If it's not coded up properly, then the L key will not take you to that list, or the I key will not take you to the individual items in that list. So there's lots of really different cool ways to navigate. But I'm going to pause for a minute here in case we can, if there's any questions I had not answered. I apologize. We are 3 minutes over at the moment. I can still hang around.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, we also started a tiny bit late. So I think, anyone, if you need to leave, we totally understand. If you want to stay around, I think we could maybe do a few more minutes. I did see a question. I can't find it right now, but the gist of it was they were wondering if it's possible to save the speech viewer file.
Yeah, I don't think it's built in. I usually have to just do a copy and paste. You can select the text that's in the speech viewer, and then I have to copy it to a document. There may be an option somewhere. I haven't actually looked into it because I don't do that often. If I'm reporting a bug and I want to have exactly what the speech reader reads, then I will select just that part of the text in the speech viewer and copy it and then paste it into a JIRA issue or something that I might be reporting. So I generally don't save the entire speech viewer dialogue. There's I don't know if there's other questions up above in the chat. I'm only seeing what's at the very bottom, but John was asking about the different modes with the screen readers, the browser mode and input mode and object mode. And that's an excellent point. So these browser keys, just real quick. So these browser keys, the letter B or the letter C to navigate to the next button or combo box, that's when you're in this like browse mode. Different screen readers call it different things, but essentially you're browsing the page, you're inspecting the page. And so these single letter shortcut keys will actually take you to different elements, T for table. However, if you're in, say, an input field where you need to type letters, the screen reader NVDA by default will switch modes from browse mode to input mode because I'm on an input field in this case, so that typing the letter B will not take me to the next button on the page. It'll actually let me type the letter B into the input field. And that's one of the settings you can tell by default. It'll do this automatic switching between browse mode and input mode. You can turn that off so that you have to toggle the modes manually yourself if that's what you want to do. But in general, it will do the switching for you. And there's also an audible, at least with NVDA, there's an audible sound that plays when you switch modes. There's like a beep sound and then a bonk sound when you toggle between the two. And there's a couple other different element types. Input is one of them, but there's some other elements such as a menu or a tab navigator that will automatically switch modes between the browse mode and the input mode. And then of course you can do it yourself. I can press the enter key or the escape key with NVDA to toggle between the two different modes.
Dave asked, is there a need to port NVDA to Mac operating systems, or has anyone been discussing that?
As far as a need, because the Mac has VoiceOver built in, which is really cool. It's an awesome screen reader that comes with your Mac. You may not know it's there. Command F5 will turn it on in case you weren't aware of it. And then Command F5 will turn it back off in case you get into a mode where it's on and you can't figure out how to turn it off. I don't know that NVDA, I don't know if it would compete well with VoiceOver because, Apple supports VoiceOver. They wrote it, so there's great support for it. There may be a discussion, I don't know, maybe a discussion on one of the NVDA forums where someone has asked about it. I'm sure it's been asked before. I just don't know if there's a large request for that. I suppose if people keep requesting it, then maybe it'll come up. And VoiceOver on, whether you're on a Mac or an iOS device, VoiceOver is a little steeper learning curve for VoiceOver because it's not just the simple tab through the interface. There's some other keys you hit with VoiceOver to navigate. Control Option Shift down arrow to go into certain modes and things like that, that are not quite as intuitive as just interacting with the page as you normally would. So it's a little steeper learning curve, but it's still a really cool and fantastic screen reader.
I will say I switched from Windows to Mac recently, and I find VoiceOver much harder to use than NVDA.
It has a steeper learning curve. It does, definitely.
Yeah. I think we might have time for one more question, and then we probably need to thank you for your time, Glenn. Does anyone else have any final questions or thoughts that they want to share?
Let me go to my last. Sorry, there were a couple of websites we were going to show for people who are actually part of this meetup group, and apologize we didn't get to those. They were kind enough to volunteer their website as a guinea pig, and I would navigate through it, and I'm not going to say how bad any websites are. I'll point out all the good stuff that works and point out things that maybe sound a little funky with a screen reader. But I wanted to go to back to the final slide. Just my contact information was on here, which I failed to mention earlier. Of course, you can post a comment on the meetup page and I'll see that. You can email me directly if you want. I love answering questions. My email is glen.walker@gmail.com, and Glen is spelled with one N. I also have my LinkedIn page, but you can probably just if you do Glen Walker accessibility in a Google search, maybe that probably would show up. But the LinkedIn page is linkedin.com/in/Glen, spelled with one N, -Walker.
Yeah, so I'm sure that Glenn I have found is very helpful and willing to contribute. And also you do freelance testing. So if someone needs help with testing, they can hire you as well. Perhaps we can set up a follow-up where you actually show us, now that we know all the settings, with some of those websites. And I think this was a great, really thorough presentation. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So just so they can get a quick shout out here. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing it, Anfira. I'm pronouncing it the same way the screen reader did. So Anfira.com was one of the websites, as well as PBWebD, if that's how you pronounce it. Danielle, I'm not sure. Sorry if I mispronounced that. So these were the two pages that we were going to look at, and some really cool stuff going on these pages. But yeah, sorry we didn't get to do those.
Yeah, so maybe I'll reach out to you and we can set up a follow-up possibly. So
yeah,
right.
That'd be great.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you to our wonderful interpreters and our live captioner for helping out as well. We appreciate that. Just one more quick shout out. If you're on Twitter, and you can thank ljs.dev. Leon, he is the sponsor who made the extra accessibility things possible. So if you could send him a quick thanks, that is helpful. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.
All right, thank you.